Today I want to talk about probably my favorite underground band, and a band that not enough people have heard about. The band was pretty game-changing for experimental music, but is just rarely talked about these days. And that band is the Butthole Surfers.
There's a time to fuck and a time to cry, but the shaw sleeps in Larry's grave.
The Butthole Surfers were an experimental rock band formed in the late 70s by Gibby Haynes and Paul Leary. The two met in university in San Antonio, Texas, and formed a bond over their shared passion of underground and weird music. They did not, however, go straight into music. Instead, their first business endeavor was selling Lee Harvey Oswald themed merch and shirts, which didn't go well, unsurprisingly. After this obviously flopped, the two would start playing at local shows in the early 80s, but without a band name. This would eventually be fixed in 1982 when, for some reason, they settled on the Butthole Surfers. During one of their early shows, the band met a man named Jello Biafra, who was the frontman of his own band, Dead Kennedys, and also owned a record label called Alternative Tentacles. Jello liked what he heard and told the Butthole Surfers that they could open for him at his next show. He also told them that his record label would pay for their studio time whenever they released their first EP. Pretty soon after this, the band did begin work on their first EP, which released in July 1983, simply titled Butthole Surfers, although also having an alternate title named Brown Reason to Live and the Pee-Pee Sailor. Again, not sure where these names are coming from, but yeah. This EP did a very good job at setting the groundwork for the really weird and abrasive rock that the band would become known for. He was also a main inspiration to Kurt Cobain, as he listed it as one of his top 50 albums that helped define Nirvana's sound. The band would tour for a while to promote their EP before returning to the studio in 1984. During these studio recordings, the band ended up making enough songs for 2 full-length albums. However, when they approached Alternative Tentacles, they realized that Alternative Tentacles was in debt to the studio still. The band eventually got tired of waiting and cut ties with Alternative Tentacles and signed to Touch and Go Records. Finally, in December of 1984, their first album was released, titled Psychic, Powerless, Another Man's Sack. The album has this very dirty and creepy atmosphere the whole time, and honestly, it always keeps you guessing as to what's going to happen next. At one point, just being Gibby Haynes burping into the microphone over and over. The album received a lot of praise in the underground scene, and soon after its release, the band announced their new tour. And while we're on the topic, the Butthole Surfers' live performances were very, very insane. On multiple occasions, Gibby Haynes would fill condoms full of blood and hide them around his body underneath his clothes. Then, while performing, he would purposely fall on stage, making them burst and making it look like he severely injured himself. They were also known to pour lighter fluid all over inverted cymbals and then smash them as hard as they could, igniting them. And also frequently threw toilet paper into the audience, which I guess kind of makes sense. But by far the most controversial thing they ever did was when they were at an all-ages show performing and got on stage and stripped completely naked before they started playing, probably ruining a few childhoods. For some reason, this did not get them shut down, but later in the show, Gibby started lighting equipment on fire, which finally prompted the security guards to intervene. Aside from this one instance, most people really did enjoy the shock of going to a Butthole Surfers concert and seeing all the crazy shit they did. The band would eventually move to Athens, Georgia, and reportedly stalked members of REM on a daily basis in the area. I don't know why, but they did. Regardless of that, in 1986 the band would release their second LP, titled Rembrandt Pussy Horse. While the album stayed true to the weird experimental roots of the band, it was definitely a lot more psychedelic than the first one. It's definitely worth checking out, but not really a personal favorite of mine. This would soon be followed very quickly by a third LP in 1987, titled Locust Abortion Technician, and this is seen by most fans as the peak of the Butthole Surfers. The album honestly did do a lot of new shit, with many even considering it a precursor to grunge, and you can honestly hear it pretty well. This album is also responsible for probably the weirdest song that the band has ever put out, titled USSA. which is literally just Gibby Haynes screaming USSA for 2 minutes and 14 seconds over schizophrenic drumming and guitar. While this album never took them to the mainstream, it still made huge waves in the underground community. With Locust Abortion Technician being such a breakthrough for the band, they'd be touring all the time now. And when it came time for them to make their 4th studio album, they realized something. While they were touring, they never stopped making new music, it just hadn't been released. And they realized that they had enough songs finished to just put onto a new album and polish up. This was a good idea in theory, however former members of the band would later say that it took away a lot of the spontaneous creativity. Because of their more planned out approach with this album, it didn't take long to finish. And in January of 1988, Hairway to Steven was released. During its initial release, the album didn't actually have a track listing. Instead, on each CD's cover, there were 8 crude drawings, with a number next to them, 1 through 8. While the album is solid, it's definitely not hard to see why a lot of band members didn't like it looking back. It's definitely missing a lot of that energy and creativity and just, in general, sounds a lot more like a basic rock album. On top of all this, fans were starting to get tired of all their crazy shit they did at live shows. And it wasn't because they dialed it back or anything like that. They just never did anything new, and it was starting to wear on people a lot. One thing I never really see people talk about is that they released another EP around this time, titled Widowmaker, which has some of their most solid content in a long time. The band would then sign with Capitol Records, which caused a lot of their fans to start calling them sellouts. Despite this, the band began work on their 5th studio album, with John Paul Jones, the bassist of Led Zeppelin, producing it for them. In January of 1993, independent Worm Saloon was released to the public. And this is by far the best sounding Butthole Surfers album to date. But that doesn't really mean it's good. Despite how well produced it is, it really is just a normal punk album, which sucks, because this is 1993 when punk music was huge, and Butthole Surfers just didn't really do anything to reinvent it or stand out. Despite a clear lack of creativity compared to the previous records, the album did really well, and even hit the radio with the first song, Who Was In My Room Last Night. With the release of their next record, Electro Larryland, in 1996, the band would be shot into the mainstream, but at the cost of losing a lot of their fans. The song Pepper in particular was huge at the time and really broke through the mainstream. The album as a whole is okay. There's really nothing special there. It kind of has a lot of the same problems that independent Worm Saloon has, but a plus side is that it's not over an hour fucking long. But even despite this, it really does still feel like most of the album is just filler. Coming off the success of the song Pepper, the band began work on what is considered their best album ever made, titled After the Astronaut, which released in never. That didn't happen. Instead, we got a piece of shit album. Yeah, so for whatever reason, there were disagreements with their record label, and After the Astronaut didn't actually release, despite having a lot of songs already finished. I couldn't exactly find what the specific disagreements they had were, but in 2001 they did patch things up and did continue working on it, but by this point, their creative juices were just gone. In 2001, the band would release the album Weird Revolution, which would be their final album up to this point. And good God, this is such a shitty album. I didn't even finish it for this video. I don't really know how to explain it. It's not the worst album ever made, but in the context of this band, it is terrible, and I just could not finish it. It is one of the tackiest things I've ever heard. With this release, nothing would really come out of it. They didn't get any success from it really, and the Butthole Surfers would never release any new music again. Despite their massive downfall with their last few albums, the Butthole Surfers was a very influential band and a very good band that you should check out. I'm going to be putting a few links in the description to their music, although not all of it is in the same place. Spotify has about 90% of their stuff, with the exception of a few tracks, including this one that I'm not going to say the name of. But as far as I know, none of their music is lost, so I'll link as much as I can find. But yeah, thanks for watching. Sorry if this sounds like I recorded it with a fucking potato. I've just been walking around my room with my phone. I don't have a mic, so sorry about that. Yeah, bye.
Yo, Skrill, drop it hard.